I was just finishing up my day at the office when I got the text. It was from my boss, Daniel. I'd been working under him for a few years now, and we had a professional relationship, nothing more. He was a great boss, supportive but straightforward, and we never had any issues. His wife, Emma, was someone I'd met a couple of times at company events, always polite and friendly, but nothing ever stood out. She was, well, just the boss's wife. The message seemed simple enough. Hey, Ryan, could you do me a favor? Emma's at the event tonight, and she needs a ride home. She'll be ready around 10 p.m. Can you pick her up? I didn't think much of it. I had no plans, and I was happy to help. It wasn't unusual for Daniel to ask me for small favors, and driving his wife home was hardly out of the ordinary. By 10 p.m., I was at the venue. Emma was standing outside, chatting with a few people, but when she saw me, she excused herself and made her way over. Her blonde hair shimmered under the streetlights, her outfit chic and effortless. She had a way about her that made people notice her without trying too hard. Her smile was warm, and she waved at me as I approached. Hey, Ryan, thank you for doing this. I know Daniel would have, but he's wrapped up in work as usual, Emma said, her voice light and friendly. No problem at all, I replied, trying to keep it casual. I wasn't nervous. It was just a ride, after all. We chatted for a bit as we walked to the car, mostly small talk about the event, the usual. But something felt off. There was an energy between us, a shift in the usual dynamic. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I didn't want to overthink it. Once we got in the car, I started the engine. Emma put her seatbelt on, and the air between us was suddenly heavier. I glanced at her briefly, catching her eyes for a second. She smiled, and there was something about it, something that made me feel like this wasn't just a regular ride home. So, how's work been for you lately, Ryan? She asked, leaning back in her seat, clearly settling in for the ride. Oh, busy as usual, I replied, trying to stay calm. I've got a lot of projects in the pipeline, but it's good. Keeps me on my toes. Good, she said, nodding. I know how you get when you're really focused. It's impressive, actually. The compliment was nothing new, but something in her tone caught me off guard. She was always polite, but this felt different. I could feel my pulse quicken, and I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying not to let my mind wander too far. Emma was Daniel's wife, for heaven's sake. I needed to keep it professional, but the more I drove, the more I couldn't ignore the underlying tension between us. The small talk seemed to fizzle out quickly, and we both fell into a comfortable silence. Yet, it wasn't the kind of silence that comes from two people enjoying the quiet. No, this felt heavier. I was acutely aware of her presence, the way she sat just a little too close to me, the way her perfume lingered in the air. It was hard to concentrate, and my mind raced. When we reached her house, I pulled into the driveway, uncertain how to break the tension. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, her movements deliberate, and she turned to look at me. Thanks again, Ryan. It's always nice talking to you. I don't get a chance to do that much anymore, she said, her voice softer now, almost inviting. Of course, Emma. Anytime, I said, my tone unsure. She smiled again, but this time it felt like there was something more behind it. Daniel is lucky to have you as his assistant. You're always there when he needs you. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I try my best. As she got out of the car, she gave me one last look, one that lingered a moment too long. Something in the air between us had shifted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a casual favor anymore. I started to drive away, but I couldn't help glancing back. She stood on her porch for a moment, watching me leave. I didn't know it yet, but this simple ride was about to change everything. The tension, the looks, I was sure of one thing now. I wasn't going to be able to ignore what had just happened. The next morning, I couldn't shake the odd feeling from the night before. The car ride had been short, but the silence between Emma and me had stretched for miles. I kept telling myself that I was overthinking it. It was just a ride home. After all, Emma was married to Daniel, and I respected that. There was no room for any of the feelings that had started to surface. But despite my attempts to push it all to the back of my mind, every interaction I had with Emma seemed to be different. Her smile, her words, the way she looked at me, it was like a switch had been flipped, and I was suddenly seeing her in a different light. But I couldn't afford to let that happen. I had worked too hard to get where I was, and I wasn't going to mess things up with Daniel, the man who had been nothing but supportive. I couldn't let my own confusion and emotions ruin everything. At work that day, I tried to keep my head down, focusing on tasks and making sure I stayed busy. But it was impossible to ignore the lingering thoughts about Emma. Every time I passed her office or even heard her laugh in the hallway, my mind flashed back to that night. The moment she stepped into the car, the tension that had been there the whole ride, the way she lingered at the door before walking inside her house. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Hey, Ryan, I hope I didn't make things weird the other night. I just wanted to thank you again for the ride. I've been thinking about it a lot. My heart skipped a beat as I read her message. I stared at it for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Was she apologizing for the awkwardness? Or was this her way of reaching out again? I had no idea, but I knew I had to be careful. The last thing I wanted was for things to spiral out of control. No problem, Emma. It was my pleasure. I just wanted to make sure you got home safe. I kept my response simple, professional. A few minutes later, her reply came. Thanks for being so understanding. I appreciate it. If you're free tonight, I'd love to have dinner with you. Just a casual meal. I feel like we haven't had a chance to talk properly. My stomach did a flip. Dinner? With Emma? I couldn't deny the temptation of the invitation. I had never imagined spending time with her outside of work, but now, the thought of sharing a meal together seemed different. I don't know, Emma. I'm not sure that's a good idea. I hesitated before sending the message. My mind was telling me to say no, but something inside me was pulling me toward the idea. The uncertainty, the feeling that there was something more I wasn't seeing, it was all too strong to ignore. A few minutes passed before she responded. I understand if you're not comfortable. I just thought it would be nice to spend some time together outside of the office. No pressure, just dinner and conversation. It felt like she was being sincere, and yet, a part of me felt a rising sense of dread. What if this was just another way for her to blur the lines? What if this wasn't as innocent as it seemed? I stared at my phone, weighing my options. What could one dinner hurt, right? Maybe I was overthinking this, and it was just a casual invitation, nothing more. But still, the tension was there, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. Okay, I typed, finally giving in. Dinner sounds fine. When and where? I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Emma replied almost instantly. Great, I'll pick the place. How about 7 p.m.? I agreed, and just like that, plans were set. I knew I should have been more cautious, but a part of me was curious. There was something magnetic about the way she spoke, the way she carried herself. But I had to remind myself, this wasn't just some casual dinner. This was a meeting with the boss's wife, and it carried risks I wasn't sure I was ready for. As the day dragged on, I found myself increasingly anxious about the evening. What would it be like? Would it be casual, like she said? Or was there an underlying agenda I was missing? By the time I got home, I had convinced myself to keep things light and professional. Just a dinner, just conversation. That's all it had to be. I dressed casually but still tried to look presentable, knowing Emma would no doubt be looking her best. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner would be a turning point, one way or another. I wasn't sure what was coming, but I knew I wouldn't be able to ignore it for much longer. I arrived at the restaurant a little early, trying to clear my mind and shake off the anxiety building inside me. The place Emma had picked was a cozy, upscale bistro tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of spot that felt intimate without being too extravagant. As I walked in, the hostess greeted me with a polite smile and led me to a table by the window, just as I'd been instructed. I took a seat, glancing at my watch. It wasn't even 7 p.m. yet, but I couldn't help the nerves creeping up my spine. I tried to focus on the menu, scanning through the options, but my mind kept wandering back to Emma. What had she meant by reaching out like this? Why did she want to have dinner alone with me? I had known her in passing for years, but we had never really had a conversation beyond work-related topics. This felt different, too personal, too charged. I caught myself replaying her text in my mind. I feel like we haven't had a chance to talk properly. That was what she had said. But why now? Was it just about the awkwardness from the other night? Or was there something more? I shook my head. I couldn't overthink it. I had agreed to dinner, so I needed to focus on being polite, keeping things professional, and getting through the evening without making things more complicated than they already were. A few minutes later, Emma walked in, her presence immediately filling the room. She wore a black dress that hugged her figure, with her blonde hair cascading in loose waves around her shoulders. She looked stunning, effortlessly graceful, as she made her way to the table. When she saw me, she gave me a bright smile. "Hey, Ryan," she said, her voice warm. "I'm glad you could make it. I hope you didn't mind the place. I thought it would be a nice spot." I stood up to greet her, feeling the weight of the situation settle on my shoulders. "No, it's perfect. It looks great. Thanks for picking it." She sat down across from me, and for a moment, there was an awkward silence. The small talk from earlier in the day seemed so far away, and now we were here, alone together, with nothing but the weight of our unspoken thoughts hanging between us. "So," Emma said, breaking the silence, "how's everything been for you at work lately? I know you've been taking on more responsibility." I leaned back in my chair, trying to relax. "Yeah, it's been a lot, but I'm managing. There's always something to do, right? She smiled, leaning forward slightly. Yeah, that's true. I admire your work ethic, Ryan. You're one of the most reliable people I know. Her compliment caught me off guard. I wasn't used to receiving praise like this from her. Sure, I worked hard, but Emma's words felt different. There was something in the way she said it, something that made my pulse quicken just a little. Thanks, I said, trying to sound casual. I appreciate that. We continued talking about work for a bit, but it felt forced. We were both tiptoeing around the real reason why we were here, the reason I had agreed to this dinner. Eventually, the conversation veered into more personal territory. Emma talked about how she had been feeling lately, how the events of the past few months had made her realize how much she valued the people in her life, how easy it was to get caught up in everything else and forget to take care of herself. I listened, but something in the way she spoke caught my attention. Her words were sincere, but there was an underlying vulnerability in her tone. It was different from the confident woman I usually saw at work. It was as if she was revealing something deeper, something she hadn't shared before. How about you, Ryan? Emma asked suddenly, breaking my thoughts. How do you manage it all? All the stress, the work, everything. I hesitated. It wasn't often that someone asked me that question, especially not in this context. I try to keep a balance, I said. It's not always easy, but I've learned to focus on what matters. And I guess I just keep going, day by day. Emma studied me for a moment, her eyes lingering on mine a little too long. The silence between us deepened, and I felt a shift. The professional mask we had both been wearing began to crack. There was something else now, an unspoken tension, an undeniable pull. That's a good way to live, Emma said softly, her voice quieter now, almost intimate. I've always admired that about you, Ryan. I swallowed, my heart beating faster. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with her words. She was married to Daniel, and yet, here we were, having a conversation that felt charged, full of unspoken meanings and emotions that neither of us were ready to confront. Before I could respond, the waiter came to take our order, and the moment was broken. I ordered a glass of wine, trying to focus on the present, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something between us had shifted in that brief, intimate silence. Whatever had started during that car ride, whatever had been left unsaid, was now looming between us, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. Emma smiled at me again, but it was different now. It was more knowing, more complex. And I realized in that moment that this dinner wasn't just a casual meal. It was a conversation neither of us had expected, and it was about to change everything. Dinner continued, but something in the air had shifted. The light conversation, the harmless banter, it all felt like a mask now, covering something deeper neither of us was ready to address. I kept my eyes on my plate more than I usually would, chewing slower, speaking less. Emma, on the other hand, had grown more relaxed. She sipped her wine with ease, her posture casual, confident, comfortable, too comfortable. So, she said, swirling the last of her wine, have you always been this cautious? I looked up, a little thrown by the question. Cautious? Yeah, she said, tilting her head. You're careful with your words. Your eyes watch every move, like you're always trying to stay one step ahead. I smirked, leaning back slightly. I work for your husband. That tends to teach a guy how to think before he speaks. Emma laughed, the sound soft and low. Fair enough, she said, her eyes locking on mine. But tonight, you can just be Ryan, not Daniel's employee, not the guy managing deadlines. Just you. That hit harder than it should have, and I think she knew it. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I'm not sure the line between those roles is that easy to erase. Emma leaned forward, her expression softer now. I know what you're thinking, and I get it, but I didn't invite you here to cause problems. She paused, searching for the right words. I just wanted to be around someone who sees me, not as a boss's wife. Just me. That vulnerability caught me off guard. The confident, composed Emma I'd always seen had peeled back just enough to reveal something real underneath. And as much as I wanted to put up a wall, I couldn't help but feel drawn in. You're seen, Emma, I said, before I could stop myself. You always have been. A silence settled between us again, heavy this time, meaningful. Her eyes flickered, and for a moment, it looked like she might say something more. But she didn't. She just smiled, a small, almost bittersweet curve of her lips. After we finished dinner, we walked out into the night together. The street was quiet, dimly lit by soft yellow lights, and for a moment, everything felt strangely peaceful. She stopped near her car, turned to face me. Thank you for tonight, she said, her voice low. I nodded. You're welcome. It was unexpected. Emma looked at me for a long moment, then stepped in and hugged me. Not quick, not distant. It was slow, warm, lingering. I froze. unsure of what to do, before finally placing my hands gently on her back, returning it briefly. When she pulled away, she looked up at me with something in her eyes I couldn't quite name. "I should go," she said quietly. "Yeah," I replied, voice tight. "Drive safe." She got into her car and didn't look back as she drove away. I stood there for a few seconds, stunned, heart pounding. I knew we hadn't crossed a line physically, but emotionally, something had happened, something I couldn't take back, and I had no idea what would come next. The next morning, everything looked the same desk, the same coffee machine sputtering in the break room, the same quiet hum of keyboards. But I wasn't the same. Something had changed in me, or maybe it had just been brought to the surface. Emma hadn't messaged me since dinner. I didn't expect her to. Part of me hoped she wouldn't. The other part, well, that was harder to admit. I kept glancing at my phone, irrationally expecting a message that never came, and that silence was louder than any words she could have sent. Around noon, Daniel called me into his office. My chest tightened as I knocked on the glass door. "Come in," he said. Without looking up, I stepped in, trying to act normal, professional, like his wife hadn't hugged me last night in a way that still lingered on my skin. "I need you to handle the Montgomery file," he said, tapping his desk. "Take it directly to Emma this afternoon. She's working from home. She'll review the contracts before I sign off." I froze. "Oh, sure. Of course." He glanced up. Eyes sharp. "Everything good?" I nodded too quickly. Yeah, all good." He went back to his computer, and I slipped out before my nerves could betray me. By 2 p.m., I was parked outside their home again, manila folder in hand. I sat in my car longer than necessary, debating whether I should text her first. I didn't. I just walked up and knocked. The door opened almost instantly. Emma stood there barefoot, wearing a loose white blouse and jeans. Casual, but it did nothing to ease the tension in my chest. "Hey," she said, surprised. "I didn't know you'd be the one bringing it." I held up the folder. "Daniel asked me to drop it off." She nodded and stepped aside, letting me in. "You want water? Coffee?" I shook my head. "I won't stay long." But I didn't leave. Not right away. We stood there for a beat too long in the entryway. She took the folder, set it on the counter, and leaned against it. "About last night," she said softly. I exhaled. "Emma, I wasn't trying to make things complicated," she interrupted. I meant what I said." I swallowed hard. "You're married." "I know," she said quickly, eyes falling. "And I'm not proud of how I've been feeling. But I can't pretend either. Being around you feels different, like I can finally breathe." I didn't know what to say. The room felt too quiet, too close. I took a step back. "I should go." She nodded slowly, not arguing. As I opened the door, she said one last thing. "If you ever feel the same, even just for a moment, you know where I am." I didn't respond. I just stepped outside, letting the door close behind me with a soft click. But her words followed me all the way to my car. The drive back to the office was a blur. I don't remember the traffic, the stoplights, or the song playing on the radio. All I could hear were Emma's words echoing in my head. "If you ever feel the same, even just for a moment." I wanted to believe it was just a moment of weakness on her part, some emotional spillover from a rough patch in her marriage. But I knew better. The look in her eyes wasn't confusion. It was clarity. She knew exactly what she felt. And if I was being honest, so did I. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in my car for a minute longer than I should have. I wasn't ready to face Daniel. Not yet. Not after standing in his house just 20 minutes ago while his wife all but confessed feelings for me. I kept telling myself I hadn't done anything wrong, not physically, but emotionally. That line had been crossed the moment I didn't walk away from dinner the night before. Inside the office, I kept my head down, pushing through tasks like a robot. When Daniel passed my desk, I forced a smile and nodded, pretending I wasn't drowning inside, pretending I wasn't harboring a secret that could shatter everything. Later that evening, as I left the building, my phone buzzed. "Emma, I know today was strange. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I just couldn't keep pretending like you don't matter to me." I read the message twice, then locked my screen without replying. I didn't have the strength, not yet. I knew one wrong move would drag both of us into a place we couldn't come back from. But 2 hours later, I found myself pacing around my apartment, replaying her message in my head. I kept asking myself the same question. Why did she have to say it? Why did she have to make me feel something I was trying so hard to ignore? Then, against my better judgment, I picked up the phone and typed. "It's not that you made me uncomfortable. I just don't know what to do with all of this." The message was simple. Honest. Maybe too honest. She responded almost instantly. "Then let's just talk. No pressure. I won't push. Just come by. We don't even have to talk about us. I just need someone right now." My stomach turned. I stared at the blinking cursor, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I should have said no. I should have ended this days ago. But instead, I found myself replying, "Okay." I'll come by. Just for a bit. The second I hit send, my heart sank. There was no turning back now. When I pulled up outside Emma and Daniel's house that evening, I sat in my car with the engine running, staring at the porch light glowing through the soft dusk. Everything in me screamed to turn around, to drive home and forget this ever started. But my hands wouldn't move. My body betrayed me, or maybe it was my heart that did. After a long breath, I cut the engine and stepped out. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been waiting. Her hair was tied back this time, face bare, sweater loose around her shoulders. She looked real, not polished, not perfect, just Emma, and that somehow made it worse. "Hey," she said gently, stepping aside. "Come in." I nodded, stepping into the familiar hallway. My shoes echoed softly against the hardwood floor, and the scent of something warm, maybe cinnamon or vanilla, lingered in the air. It didn't feel like Daniel's house anymore. It felt like hers. We moved to the living room, and she motioned for me to sit on the couch while she grabbed tea from the kitchen. No wine, no candles, just 2 mugs, 2 people sitting a little too close for comfort. "Thanks for coming," she said as she handed me a cup. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted, staring into the steam. "But I figured I owed you at least a conversation." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I know this is a mess, and I don't expect anything from you, Ryan. I've been alone in this house more than you can imagine, and lately, you've been the only person I've actually felt seen by." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me was flattered, moved even, but another part, the part tied to loyalty, to logic, it was screaming that this was dangerous. "Emma, you're not invisible," I said quietly. "But this situation, it's not right." "I know," she whispered. "Believe me, I know. But when I'm around you, I don't feel like I'm suffocating." That word, suffocating, stuck with me. "I can't be your escape," I said, trying to steady my voice. "You're married to a man I work for, a man I respect." Her eyes met mine, glassy but steady. "I'm not asking you to be anything. I just wanted one night where I didn't feel like I was disappearing." Silence stretched between us. I should have left then. I should have stood up, walked out, and drawn the line that should have been drawn days ago. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed seated, my fingers tightening around the warm mug, heart pounding like a war drum. She didn't move closer. She didn't touch me. But her presence was overwhelming. And in that quiet, between sips of tea and unsaid words, the line between right and wrong blurred just a little more. I don't know how long we sat there, minutes, hours? The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but neither of us paid attention to time. The house was still, heavy with the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of things unsaid, thoughts avoided, lines crossed, not with actions, but with every glance and breath. Emma didn't speak again for a while. She just sipped her tea slowly, eyes occasionally flicking to mine and then away. I stared at the floor most of the time, as if the answer to all of this might be hiding in the wood grain. I kept telling myself that I should leave, that the longer I stayed, the closer we were to something irreversible. But still, I stayed. Finally, she set her mug down and spoke, her voice quieter than before. "Do you ever feel like you're living a life that doesn't belong to you?" I looked at her. Her gaze was fixed on the bookshelf across the room, like she wasn't even talking to me, but to some version of herself she couldn't reach. "I feel like that all the time," she said, smiling at parties, playing the supportive wife. "Everyone thinks we have it perfect, but they don't see the distance. The quiet dinners, the separate lives under one roof." "Have you talked to Daniel?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She gave a sad smile. "Tried, but he's married to the job now. I used to resent it. Now, I don't even feel angry, just invisible." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't want to be the reason you leave something behind that might still be saved." She finally looked at me. "You're not the reason. You're just the reminder that I deserve to feel something again." Those words hit harder than I expected. Before I could respond, headlights swept across the window, a car pulling into the driveway. We both froze. Emma stood abruptly, eyes wide. My heart dropped to my stomach. "No," she whispered, moving toward the window. She peeked through the blinds, then turned back to me, face pale. "It's Daniel." Panic surged through me. I stood up fast, nearly knocking over my mug. "You said he was out of town," I hissed, already scanning the room for a way to make this look like nothing. He was. He wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow." Her voice trembled. Footsteps on the front porch. The jingle of keys. I didn't think. I just moved. "Bathroom," she whispered, pointing down the hall. I slipped in, closing the door silently just as the front door opened. I stood there in the dark, pressed against the cold wall, listening to muffled voices from the living room. Daniel's deeper tone, Emma's lighter one, trying to sound normal. Every second felt like a lifetime. And in that moment, it was crystal clear. This had gone too far. I stood in the dim bathroom, barely breathing. My heart hammered in my chest, The sound of Daniel's voice just feet away, sending chills through my entire body. I strained to hear what was being said, though the words were muffled by the wall between us. "Wasn't expecting you back tonight," I heard Emma say, her voice light, but with a tightness underneath. Daniel chuckled. "Flight landed early. Figured I'd surprise you. Didn't think you'd be home alone, though. Lights were on." My pulse skipped. Did he suspect something? Emma responded quickly. "Yeah. I just stayed up reading. I wasn't tired yet." Silence followed. Then footsteps. Closer. I didn't know if Daniel was moving toward the hall, or if it just felt that way because every sense I had was on high alert. I debated what to do. Should I sneak out the back? Pretend I just stopped by to drop something off and left? But that would make her look worse. It would expose her. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. Then, Daniel spoke again. "You okay, Em? You seem off." She paused, and when she answered, her voice was softer. "I'm just tired, and I wasn't expecting company." Another silence. Then a chair creaked. He was sitting. They were talking. It bought me time. Minutes passed. I stayed still, careful not to make even the smallest sound. My muscles ached from tension, my thoughts racing. How had I let it come to this? One ride home, one dinner, one conversation too far. Now I was hiding in another man's house, my boss's house, like some kind of criminal. Eventually, I heard Daniel yawn. "I'm gonna shower. Early meeting tomorrow. You coming up soon?" "Yeah," she replied quickly. "In a bit." His footsteps moved away from the living room, up the stairs. A door creaked open, then closed. A beat passed, then another. Then I heard Emma's quiet footsteps as she walked toward the hall. The bathroom door cracked open, and she whispered, "Come on." I slipped out, careful not to make a sound. We moved like shadows down the hall and out the back door into the night. She walked with me around to the side of the house where my car was still parked. Neither of us spoke until I reached for the driver's side handle. "Ryan," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear." "I know," I said, meeting her eyes. But it did. We stood there for a second, the porch light flickering above us. She looked like she wanted to say more, maybe explain, maybe beg me to stay, but I shook my head. "This can't happen again," I said firmly. "No more texts. No more visits. It's done." She nodded slowly, eyes glassy. "Okay." I got in the car and pulled away, watching her fade into the darkness in the rearview mirror. And even though I drove off, something told me this wasn't truly over. The next few days passed in a strange fog. I went to work like normal, nodded when Daniel passed my desk, sat through meetings, answered emails, but it all felt hollow. My body was there, but my mind was stuck back in that hallway. In that moment, I nearly got caught. The closeness, the danger, the guilt. I didn't hear from Emma, not a single word. I hadn't expected to, not after what I said. But that didn't stop me from checking my phone every few hours, half hoping, half dreading her name would appear. By Friday, I thought maybe the dust was starting to settle. I could breathe again, at least a little. That afternoon, Daniel called me into his office. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. He waved me in casually. "Shut the door for a sec, will you?" I did as he asked, heart thudding in my ears. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying me. "I want to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." I nodded slowly. "Of course." He hesitated, then said, "Has something been going on with Emma?" I froze. Everything inside me screamed deny, pretend, act shocked, but something in his voice, it wasn't angry. It was tired, like he already knew. "What do you mean?" I asked, carefully. Daniel sighed. "I don't know. She's been distant, different. I've asked her about it, and she says everything's fine, but I don't believe her. And lately, I keep getting the sense that maybe something happened. Someone else, maybe." My mouth went dry. "Daniel, I respect you a lot, and I'd never do anything to betray that." He looked at me for a long time. That wasn't a yes or no. I stayed silent. That silence was the answer. He nodded slowly, jaw tightening. "I had a feeling. I'm not asking for details. I don't even want to know what happened. I just needed to see your face when I asked." I swallowed hard. "It didn't go where you think it did, but it went far enough," he said. I looked away. He stood, walked to the window, arms crossed. "You're a good employee, Ryan. One of the best I've had. But this crosses every line." "I know," I said, voice low. "And I'm sorry." He nodded again, still facing the window. "You should start looking for something new." The words hit harder than I expected, but I didn't fight them. I stood quietly, turned toward the door. Before I left, he spoke once more. "You're not a bad guy, but you made a bad call. We all do. Just don't make the same one again." I walked out of his office, my chest hollow. By Monday, my resignation letter was on his desk. And by the end of the week, I was gone. Emma never reached out again. And maybe that was for the best.